All right. I just heard the recording go live, so I'll just say thank you again. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for that intro, Katie. It's my second time having this opportunity to speak to the group. I don't even know the timelines because they've been so jumbled the last several years, but at least a couple of years ago, I spoke on purpose as well. And today we're going to use this, what I consider a modern classic, The Alchemist, uh, as kind of a framework and a source to talk about finding meaning in times like these.
Ben, I can hear when you touch the microphone, but I can't hear your voice yet. Try again.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay. I have one of
Thank
these
you.
mics that you mute it by double tapping, and I accidentally do it every now and then. So sorry about that
That's
timing.
okay. Very fancy.
So if you have not read The Alchemist, that's okay. It's not like literary book study kind of talk. We're just kind of use concepts from the book to riff on this topic. But I will open here with a little summary of the story as a reminder for those who have read it and just as a little brief for those who haven't. So The Alchemist is the story of a shepherd named Santiago from Spain, and very humble origins, very simple life. And he begins to have these extremely vivid dreams about finding a treasure, like a literal treasure. And so powerful are these dreams that he's like called into action. And he kind of begins this quest, which is the journey of the story that leads him into North Africa, across the desert, all the way to the pyramids of Egypt. And it's in some ways it's like a classic adventure story, like a treasure hunt. But ultimately, it becomes clear that treasure here is a metaphor for something else, for something bigger, which is finding your path and your purpose in life. And there's many twists and turns. There's like one of the most epic twists towards the end of the story that I think exists in modern lit. So I don't want to spoil it for those who haven't read it. But one thing I really like, a lot of authors and thinkers talk about purpose, but one thing I like about how author Paulo Coelho, the Brazilian author of the book and this book and many others, the way he frames purpose is in this book he talks about this concept called the personal legend. One of our jobs, one of our responsibilities as humans is to discover and embody what he calls our personal legend. And this is a way of embracing the story of why we're here. And I think what's kind of unique about this particular take on purpose is that it's not about heavy obligation and sacrifice so much. That might be part of the story, but it's about happiness. It's about a sense of meaning that you follow. And it's what Joseph Campbell might call follow your bliss. There's like a definite tie in there. So this is kind of like it's a challenging but optimistic view of purpose, that it's about really following that inner calling where we find a sense of meaning, and that's not separate from the universe. And we're going to get to a key concept there in just a moment. But I'm going to transition now. I'm actually going to share two personal stories because I think they're perfect setups for linking it back to concepts from the book and to your lives, I hope. Okay. First, I'm going to tell you how I met my wife, and then I'm going to tell you about how I met my main spiritual teacher. Not because I'm special or the stories are particularly special, but they really, I think, accentuate and highlight a key concept uh, from the book, which is about being open to what the author calls the language of the world. Okay, the language of the world. So, how I met my wife. I'm 19 years old. I'm a freshman at the University of Iowa. It's still the fall semester. I'm kind of new. Painting the picture, I'm an extremely introverted, serious, heavy, philosophical 19-year-old. I'm like 19 going on 70, okay? I don't socialize much. I'm very introverted, and one thing I never do and had not done ever was dance. So, that's what makes the beginning of this story so strange. It was a Monday evening, and my roommate, my college roommate who I just met a month before, is like, "Hey Ben, Monday night is salsa night down at Gabe's bar. Let's go." And I don't have any clue what would have compelled me to say yes to go dance in a bar on a Monday night with someone I just met? I hate dancing, but something kind of like nudge took over my body. And one of the themes here that I hope I get across is that this was beyond the intellectual level. There's something like a buzzing in the body that's just like, yep, go. So I'm like, okay, let's go, let's do this. So we get to the bar, it's salsa night. There are these two Cuban dance instructors, the music's kind of already playing, the mood's there. And they're like, okay, guys, we're going to start. Everyone find your partner. And I just kind of stood there. I wasn't really socially skilled at the level to pick up a partner like that with the snap of a finger. So I just stood there. It seemed everyone had a partner. And then the instructor kind of looks around, he notices me, and he's like, okay, does anyone not have a partner yet? And there were two of us. It was me, and then across the room, a beautiful woman, girl. I mean, she was 19 at the time, so I think I can call her a girl. And he's like, okay, you two, partners. And 1 year later, I was married to that woman, living in Argentina with a kid. So if that's not a little twist and touch of destiny, I don't know what is. Okay. So that's kind of story number one. The setup, getting the nudge, listening to the uncharacteristic nudge, and then the universe kind of setting something up. It didn't do it all for me. Like, it still took a lot of action and a lot of courage to follow through that part of my personal legend, but it did. And it all started with this synchronicity. Okay. All right. Story number two, how I met my main spiritual teacher. So this was a couple years from the story I just told. So I'm in my early 20s. As I just hinted, I already had a kid. And so to kind of like be the householder, be the responsible dad, I had taken a corporate job. So I'm working in the corporate world, literally in a cubicle farm, and not very happy, thinking I'd like made huge mistakes. I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere along the line. What had I done to deserve this? I was smothered. I was not living my creative potential, blah, blah, blah. Woe is me kind of stuff, right? However, I began to have some dreams. Now, just a really quick backstory. My dad was a Lutheran minister. All right. So I kind of grew up in church culture, Lutheran culture in particular. And so I had been exposed to that particular tradition. And, when people learn about my modern kind of spiritual path, sometimes they assume and ask me, oh, so you rejected that, you rejected Christianity. But that's not the case at all. However, there was something that I could not find in the everyday spiritual life that I saw within the church that I grew up in, and I was hungry, so I was a seeker. I was reading books. I was trying meditations. This was like, kind of pre-internet, pre-Google, so this was a lot of reading, a lot of experimentation. And then in my early 20s, I begin to have these super vivid dreams, very vivid dreams. And in these dreams, these Buddhist monks would be welcoming me. I'd be walking into a room, and these Buddhist monks would look up and see me, and they'd be so happy, laughing, like, finally, you're here. Like, that was the feeling. And I won't call it a lucid dream, because technically I wasn't waking up in the dream and having control, but it had this vividness, this quality where you like wake up and you're like, that was way more real than this, that kind of sensation, right? So I was having these dreams, and I'm like, okay, what do I do with this? I was living in North Texas at the time, not exactly a hotbed of Buddhism that I knew of, right? So in this corporate job, I thought I was stuck. I'd made some kind of wrong turn in life, and then I walk into work one day. I usually got there early, so it's like 7:30 a.m. I walk into my cubicle, and there's a business card laying across my keyboard, and I'm like, that's weird. I pick it up, and it's Lama Dujum Dorje, Tibetan meditation teacher, scholar, spiritual leader. I'm like, what is this? What on earth? And so there's the card. I'm like, okay, I got you, universe. Thank you. I sat on it for a few days, and eventually I called the number, and I'm like, hey, I got your card. I need to know what to do. Like, what's this all about? That led to an in-person interview. on and on and on. Ended up studying. I still study with that teacher, in my ongoing spiritual evolution and exploration. But there did end up being an earthly explanation for that, by the way. There was someone else in the office who had gone to like some kind of public talk. They met the Lama and they're like, that guy from work, Ben, I think would be into this. So somehow he's a part of the puzzle too, because he had to follow his nudge, grab the card, lay it on my keyboard. But anyhow, this is what Paulo Coelho would call the language of the universe. So the core concept here is that there's this soul of the universe. That's what he calls it. It's the soul of the universe, which there'd be other names for it in other traditions, right? The transcendentalists might call it the oversoul. Jung might call it the collective unconscious, right? But this idea, this concept that we're all deeply, deeply interconnected beneath this surface of symbols, right? This is the soul of the universe, and that we're not separate from it. And when we feel an urge or a calling to something, it's not selfish, it's not separate from this soul of the universe. It's what the soul of the universe wants us to do to be complete, for it to be complete. So it's about kind of following these nudges and these callings. But to do that, it requires us to be in tune and out of the intellectual mind and tuned into what he calls the language of the universe, which speaks in signs, in symbols, in omens, in intuitions, in synchronicities. And so throughout the story, Santiago, our main character, has to learn again and again to quiet the thinking mind, look for the language of the universe that's bubbling up. It's this world and this language of symbols, right? But we have to be tuned into it and ready and open to follow that. And this is like the reading selections there that Katrina read were so perfect, because that concept of providence, right? From the final reading there, it's like there's this idea that we're actually never very far from our destiny. It may feel like it. It may feel like we've taken that wrong turn, or that we're stuck, or that we're so separate from this soul of the universe. But it's actually, we're just one symbol away from seeing how we're exactly where we need to be and where we're supposed to be. And it's about following that thread of destiny through the language of the universe, as he calls it. But there's one more concept that ties in and layers on here. So if we have this soul of the universe, which is kind of like this undergirding to all existence, right? That speaks to us through the language of the universe, which is this language of symbols and omens, signs and intuitions, as I said. There's one more step, because it can't do it all for us. Like there's this paradox that I feel and I see, which is, on the one hand, it's almost impossible for us not to be on our destined path. However, in order for us to feel and embody that, there's one more element, and that comes straight from the book as well, which is courage. For some reason, the sign, the symbol, the omen may take us right up here to the edge, but it can't pull us across. For some reason, there's that courage of action that we need to kind of cross that threshold. In the two stories that I shared, like the universe, the soul of the universe brought me my future wife right there in front of me, but that's stopped right there. I had to do the rest, right? You might say she had to do the rest, but somehow it took courage, it took action, it took turbulence, it took a lot of, difficult decisions. But there it was, my destiny right there. And the second case, same thing, business card. You can't get more literal than that, right? Okay, Ben, I got you this far. What are you going to do? You still have to build up the courage to take action, and then again, and then again, and then again. So this is, for me, this is why I think this experience has been part of all contemplative traditions, throughout time. I think this is one of the gifts of contemplative practice, is that we quiet that outer noise. And one thing that does is it opens up space for those symbols. And we might not always call it that, right? Not every tradition would call it a symbol or an omen. It could just be an intuition. A tradition might call it the voice of God, right? But whatever it is, I think practice where we come inside, we quiet the outside world, opens up space for the language of the world to appear to us. And then we have the opportunity to to take it in and then to act with courage. And I think to make the connection to kind of like this modern moment that we're in, there is so much noise, so much noise. It's like uh, the world is engineered right now to just trigger, 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 trigger. And that takes us further and further and further from the center, right? From the center. And I think it gets harder and harder to even be available for the language of the world, let alone interpret it and let alone act with courage. So I think we're in a moment, in my opinion, where big action is necessary, but it's not always like a physical rebellion. I think some of us, those of us who are focused on these inner practices and our own spiritual evolution, we are having as much impact as those kind of working to change things physical. And it's not an either or, obviously, right? We can be activists on the physical plane and also create this space to interact with the soul of the universe. And that's really where the alchemy comes in. Like you might be wondering, like, why is it called the Alchemist? Well, there's a character, there's a mystical character who is an alchemist in the story, and that's one of the most important encounters that Santiago has, of course. But also, it's this metaphor. It's this metaphor of transforming the heaviness of the world, the lead, into something different, something lighter. And how do we do this? By each of us individually kind of following that personal legend. So I'm going to share, I'm going to kind of close this part of the talk with a little reading from the book um, that I think kind of wraps this up nicely. So don't ask for too much context, but Santiago, the boy, is having a conversation with the sun, the literal sun in this moment. You can say it's maybe a mystical vision. He's out in the desert, but the dialogue here is really, really crucial. This is why alchemy exists, the boy said. So the boy is Santiago. So that everyone will search for his treasure, find it, and then want to be better than he was in his former life. Lead will play its role until the world has no further need for lead. And then lead will have to turn itself into gold. That's what alchemists do. They show that when we strive to become better than we are, everything around us becomes better too. So I like that impulse because sometimes we have this idea that a life of purpose and deep meaning is kind of like only for a privileged few or it's a luxury. And I think the message here is that it's not a selfish luxury to strive to create a life of purpose. In fact, that is the alchemy. And that's the ripple that we as individuals can create that ultimately synchronizes us with the soul of the world and ripples out and benefits everybody around us. That's for me one of the core messages here. Um, just checking my notes real quick. Yeah. Okay. I think I want to pause there. I know part of this is I share, and then there's an opportunity for others to share or chime in with questions. So yeah, I'd be fascinated to hear any reactions to that.
Well, thank you very much, Ben. That was really beautiful. I have a dozen questions for you and comments, but I'm going to defer because I have a feeling that you've really touched a lot of the folks here, and so I want to open it up. So we'll go to Katie first.
Ben, I loved your talk so much and your stories, and it was so creative to use The Alchemist. So you were really engaging. Thank you so much. My question is, as a teacher yourself, what advice would you give to someone, probably a young person, whose personal legend or personal purpose isn't financially fruitful or stable? Like I hear a lot of kids say things like, I'm meant to be an artist, but I don't want to be a starving artist or something like that. And you kind of answered this already, but basically, what would you tell someone who like they know their purpose, but they just don't have the courage yet?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, it's some of my purpose work, and I might have even shown, maybe in my last chat here, I might have even shown the diagram. There's this kind of classic quadruple Venn diagram where it's like, what's your purpose? And it's like something you're doing, something you love, something you have a talent for that overlaps, something that the world needs. And then that very last circle, which is the one you're talking about, Katie, which is you can get paid for it. So exactly, when I'm working with young people or even an adult and they're kind of stuck on that point that it's not practical, I say, I understand completely. And no one, I'm not suggesting that this is about a radical overnight life transformation, but I do believe full heartedly in this, that if you really settle into those other three, I'm embodying something I love, I'm bringing talent to it, I'm getting better and better, and I'm meeting a need of the world without worrying too much about the financial piece, that it's okay if for now this is a moonlighting experience. This is a side, yeah, a side. I hate the word hustle, but it's a side hustle, you know? What I try to tell them is like, which I know it's the hardest message to get, but like patience, right? If you stay in the energy and the frequency of those other three long enough, like things open, like the Joseph Campbell quote, follow your bliss and doors will open that you didn't know were there. Like that's the classic Joseph Campbell quote, right? So there's some faith, there's definitely a faith level involved here. So that's a really good question and kind of a messy answer, but hopefully it sounds like maybe that's where you already were.
That was a beautiful answer. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you.
Cheryl, I see your hands up.
Yes, thank you. Excuse me, Ben, thank you. I so appreciate your message. And one of the reasons why I appreciate it is because, from a different spiritual perspective, my perspective most of the time when these things happen is from a Christian view. And I
Mhm.
appreciated what you brought in because as soon as you start talking, I thought of something that happened to me last week. And to make the story shorter, is that I walked into the pharmacist to get my medication that I go every month to pick up. And this young lady who waited on me, I've never seen her there before. So as she's waiting on me, I could tell she was hesitant. And then she says, "Do you have a family member by the name of Vanessa?" I said, "That's my sister." And she said, "Her daughters, Alicia and Michelle?" I said, "Yes, those are my nieces." She immediately started to cry that she could not continue to wait on me. She left, asked someone else to wait on me, and asked me would I stay. Come to find out, this young lady had been looking for my sister for a very long time because she and her mother and my sister were good friends, but had lost contact. And I wasn't going to go. I said, "Oh, I don't feel like stopping today. I'll go tomorrow." And the strong inclination said, "Go now." If I had not gone, I would have missed her because I've never seen her there before. And so as I'm listening to you, I listen to these things through my spirituality, but I so appreciate the perspective that you brought today through that book. Thank you.
Oh, beautiful, Cheryl. Thank you for that story. I could feel that. And I did mention briefly Carl Jung. He's the Swiss psychologist who kind of like was the protege of Sigmund Freud. And he's the one who really coined this concept of synchronicity, which is like these meaningful coincidences. That's how he defined it. And definitely that's a huge part of this path and seeing the world in this way. And what I love is it's not always about us getting the synchronicities or getting the message. Sometimes it's the role that we play in someone else's synchronicity. Like your story, Cheryl, was so remarkable in that way, that you following that impulse was so important for someone else. You know, thank you for that.
Any questions in the space here?
Question.
Betty, do you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Oh,
Yeah, I
yes,
can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. And I think his name is Ben. Is that correct?
yes.
Okay. I don't see him. Ben?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Um, Talking about synchronicity. This week, I've been working for several weeks on the Book of Job because we're discussing it in one of the Zoom classes I have. And so I said, basically, I talk to God all the time. And so I said to God, I said, please help me with this because I'm not sure I understand it. And I've spent a lot of time with it. And I really would like to understand it. And so I had this feeling, but nothing else. And I was in my uh, Google and I was just pushing the buttons around and looking around. I have an eye condition and I only see partially. And so I'm going all over. And it pops on to somebody that I really like. It's an inspirational speaker that I really like. And so I thought, oh, I'm going to listen to her. I pop it on. Guess what she's talking about? She's in the middle, in the very middle of saying, um, this is a prayer. It's not really a prayer, it was questions, but I've made it into a prayer. And I'm thinking, okay, this is interesting. And she starts and she starts talking about Job and all the things. And I thought, this is, this is a miracle. I truly felt it was a miracle. And I've had a lot of synchronicities, but this one really took the cake. I mean, to me, it was just, it was like, okay, all right, I'm listening to you now, and I'm going to ask you these questions. And I think God is leading that and saying, okay, these are the questions you need to be asking yourself. You can't just look at Job because Job is a replica of who you are or whatever, or a mirror to who you are. You need to be answering these questions too. Can you do that? Can you not do it? So it was, I think it was the most, um, where everything was coming together just as I had asked about it and asked for it. I think it was the most unusual that I've ever experienced.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Thank you, Betty. And
You know,
one thing about this phenomena is I think it's like this conversation we're in. I like the way that you framed it as like a conversation with God, right? Where it's
yes,
like it's not a one-way street that's like, okay, I'll bless you with a sign now and then. It's kind of like an engagement that we're having with this field, really, right?
right.
And yeah. And one thing that Jung always said,
Can't hear you.
We know that the synchronicity is at work, so even though we're. I did see his camera freezing up, so maybe he's outside of the flow. We'll give him a second to see if he gets back. I know
Okay.
that, Alex, I see your hand, and we're ready for your question, but we'll see if our speaker is back. If not, we'd love to hear your question. So, do you want to just ask it, Alex, or share an insight, or?
Yeah, it was going to go in the almost like testimony part we were doing, but it took me forever to figure out where the raise hand thing is in Zoom. I don't do this very often. Um, it was just another weird instance of synchronicity that I could also testify to because um, the last place I was living, I was in Pennsylvania for a while. I'm from this area originally, DC, and I had run out of a medication that's not life saving, but it definitely like improves my quality of life. And CVS said they wouldn't refill it because they had refilled it too recently. And I thought that sounds stupid. Like I have an empty bottle. It couldn't have been that recent. Um, I happened to be doing laundry at the same time, and I just had this weird nudge to also wash the hand towel in the bathroom. I was like, oh, it's not that dirty, and I I kind of just replaced it, so maybe I don't need to, but I just felt like do it anyway. And so I did, which then necessitated me get a new one out of the cabinet. And what would you know that inside of the cabinet was the previous refill I had not remembered I had gotten a few weeks ago, which I just would not have known about had I not washed the towel. So is I definitely respect those instincts now, which I mean, I'm only 21. I'll be 22 in like a week. So I haven't had a long enough life to have experienced many of those. But now I'm like, I need to trust the heck out of those because they know a lot better than I do. Um, you know, that a lot of what I need is right here, and they know where to find what I need.
Thank you, Alex. Alex, when you were speaking, it made me think in the more evangelical church, sort of the church I grew up, when people would give testimonies about when they accepted Christ, and go, and I'm thinking maybe in our tradition we should have testimonies when we've had synchronicity, and that what we would call in our tradition more divine providence, because just that those simple stories that we're hearing, they're kind of always more real to us than anyone else. You tell to other people like, well, what's so big about Cheryl meeting someone at the neighborhood thing? What's the so thing about your medication? Of course you Googled Job. Like other people will very often when you share it, they're not going to get it, and it's something very important to each of us. And I always say that it helps me in my belief. I believe not intellectually. I believe because I keep experiencing these type of things, and they've been guideposts to me through my whole life. These experiences, and so the more we get into the flow, and we let God work through us, the more we can continue to have those experiences. So it looks like Ben might be back with us, but I'm not sure.
He wrote his computer crashed.
Yes. So that was synchronicity.
I am back. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's no
My
problem at all. It's all good.
Yeah, my
It all works
computer.
for the good.
Yeah, I don't know what the soul of the universe is telling me when my computer crashes mid-sentence about synchronicity. So I apologize.
It was great. Alex we were just kind of joking because Alex shared a testimony, and I was kidding that in the evangelical church you share your testimony about when you accepted God and so forth. And I was saying for us in our tradition, maybe our testimony can be our synchronicities, because everybody's been sharing stories. Alex had a really great story and each of these stories are important to each of us. And I was saying that very often you explain to somebody else and they kind of like, that doesn't sound so big. But the synchronicity, when you met your wife, someone said, oh, yeah, well, you were assigned to her. Other people don't quite get it, but we know it. And I think that's the real power in it. I had a question for you, Ben, and that is a little bit along the lines of Katie. So you described these three different levels. It's first you have to be aware, which if we're so busy, if we're constantly having inundating ourselves with videos or music or negative news cycles, whatever, we're not really aware. So you were saying be aware first, but you also described this kind of moment where we have to have courage. And of course, that's what the Alchemist is all about. But my question is there anything you can do to develop that courage? Because there's a lot of people who would listen to what you're saying and they're like, I think I know what I could do well, and I think I know what I'm called to do. And I got the message like Katie's was saying, that I'll never make enough money at it, I'll never survive at it, whatever it is. Some people have kind of downplayed it in my life. Any suggestions on how do you develop the courage? What's the process of that, or do you have any examples of that in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for me, it's really about retraining the nervous system, honestly. It's about creating space in the body and nervous system to sit with discomfort, to sit with that fear. Because normally what we're kind of unintentionally trained to do as humans in the modern world is like repress, suppress, flee, escape any kind of discomfort, right? And so we have this window of tolerance in our nervous system. So we may, as long as we're daydreaming about this new thing that we want to do, this big dream that we have, and it kind of stays up in the head, okay, that's okay. It's a daydream. It's fun to daydream. It's a little bit of an escape. But the moment we start to get a little bit serious about it, and I'm sure we have all experienced this, where it's like, this is the time I'm really going to do it. This is the year when it's really going to happen. And we start to take action. And then it's like, whoa, those waves of fear kind of come in. And our nervous system has been trained to react to that wave of fear by shutting down, by escaping. And then it comes back into the head, and the storytelling begins to continue. This isn't meant for me. I was stupid. This was dumb. This is for other people. Blah, 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 blah. The story about money, right? I can't make money at this. What was I thinking? Etc. So it sounds a little bit indirect, but by training ourselves to kind of stay in the body in those moments of discomfort, we actually increase our capacity to build a bigger life. So I know it's like an overwrought term these days, but like mindfulness practices, just simple mindfulness practices where we stay in the moment without trying to escape, just accepting what is in that moment. In me personally, you heard in my bio, breath work is a practice that I really believe in. I think it's a great practice for modern life because we get kind of we quickly feel it. It gives us a physical sensation of shift in our body and nervous system. But any kind of mindfulness practice, meditation, I think this is one of the functions of prayer, right? Is to create that inner space so that we can just stay a little bit longer with that discomfort. So I hope that answered your question, Rich. A little bit indirect, but I think like that's core.
Yeah, I've done breath work, and I found it transformational. And I haven't done, though, some of the other stuff that's in your biography, and I'll be looking up some of the more using instrumental. And I think when we last spoke, we talked about, I mentioned that Swedenborg said the angels communicate with vowels and a meditative state of resonance of musical resonance to get to a spiritual state. And I think you also teach that, and maybe we could get some of your videos for the newsletter. But I think those practices are great. We have time for one last question.
Yeah.
Not a question, but an invitation. So, Ben, you're in Philly, right? It'd be great to have you come down to DC to our church whenever you have an opportunity, and we can potentially do a class or a workshop around some of the somatic practices you teach to get into that state. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah,
and we have a guest room too.
I'd be honored. I'm just a train right away.
Yeah, we have a guest room too, which is really awesome for our speakers. So if you could come down, it'd be fantastic. So thank you very much. This 100%. Is really fantastic. Thank you for taking us on that journey. It was really beautifully done, and encourage all of us to focus on our purpose and to have the courage to step into it and pay attention to the synchronicities, because we are being guided through divine providence. So thank you so much.
Thank you.